Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class. Parashat Re'eh. We'll talk today about the blood of life. What am I referring to? We're confronted by a prohibition of consuming blood in this parasha, and the lack thereof seemingly ends in a very happy way with the blessing of life. And we'll talk about how to get from point A to point Z, we'll say, in the course of this class. Let's first dive right into the source that I'm referring to in this class itself, in Parashat Re'eh. In Perek Yud Bet, in chapter 12, in the context of Moshe Rabbeinu, speaking of how the protocol of bringing korbanot will look once they get into Eretz Yisrael, in Pasuk Tet Zayin, verse 16, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the people, Rak hadam lo tochelu. You'll bring korbanot, the Kohanim will be able to eat from some of the meat. There'll be times where the korban is not eligible to eat it all. They'll be able to be slaughtered and eaten. But in all cases, never consume blood. Al ha'aretz tishbechenu kamayim. Rather, spill it like water. In other words, it's not an option to put it on your table. A little later in the Pesukim, in the same Perek, Pasuk Kav Gimel, verse 23, in the context, in the future, when Moshe Rabbeinu speaks about when we get into Eretz Yisrael, and we're not going to be eating like in the Mishkan, in the desert, all of our meat in the context of offerings to God, rather we'll be able to slaughter. Actually, the Mizvah being able to, of Shechita is mentioned here, and we'll privately be able to have meat. He repeats once again in Pasuk Kav Gimel, Rak hazak lebetiach kol hadam. But be careful, be strong. What do you have to be strong? Don't eat the blood. Don't consume the blood. And here a reason is given. Ki adam hu hanafesh. Blood is life, is the source of the living. Lo tochal hanefesh im habasar. And don't have the source of life while consuming the meat. Again, the next pasuk, seemingly somewhat repetitive. Lo tochelenu al har tishbechenu kamayim. Don't consume it, rather spill it like water. And the next pasuk as well. Lo tochelenu, do not eat it, do not consume it. And here, a consequence. Lema'an yitab lecha ubanecha harecha ki ta'aseh yashar b'anei Adonai. In order so that goodness should be bestowed upon yourself and your descendants who follow you, your children and grandchildren, etc., when you do what is righteous or forthright, proper in the eyes of God. A consequence, seemingly a reward for not consuming this blood. Where do we start? There are so many issues to address over here. First of all, why? What's wrong with consuming blood? After all, we do consume the animal. We have the meat, just about all of the meat in the body of the animal, really all, not some fatty parts of it. Otherwise, we consume the meat of kosher animals. Why not the blood? In fact, the blood is very critical. We don't reject blood at all. It's the most essential aspect of offering sacrifices to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what's wrong with blood? There's a reason given, and we'll get to that reason soon. And it seems to be repetitive. Don't. Again, don't. Again, don't. Now, to be fair, the Achamim and Torah Sheba'al Peh tell us that there are certain different sub-prohibitions, because there's different types of blood, so to speak. There's the blood upon shechita, when you first slaughter the animal that gushes out. There's dam tamsit, there's the blood that oozes out slowly afterwards. There's dam evarim, there's blood embedded in the limbs of the animal, which is only prohibited if it moves, so to speak. This, in other words, after you kill the animal, that's why we salt the limbs. If the blood leaves this place of origin, it's prohibited. So you have to extract all the blood out of the meat of the animal. So there's different types, and therefore seems to be repetitive, but it's not. Lo tochelenu, lo tochelenu. So to be fair, the Torah is not obviously redundant. But what is the reason? And really, what is this consequence? What is this positive reward that your descendants will receive benefits, and you're doing what's good in the eyes of God. Doesn't seem like blood is something that I even want to consume, that I need to be tempted with all this reward. So what we need to do is we need to do a little bit of research in the Torah regarding the prohibition of blood. We need to find out and go through some of the theories as to why the Torah prohibits it. And then we have to get to, at the end, how is it and what is the connection to observing this mitzvah, meaning refraining from consuming of blood, and the wonderful reward that is being offered to us in our parasha. So the first time that we are introduced to the mitzvah, and really the first commandment, the lo ta'aseh, the negative command of eating blood, is back in Parashat Sav, Perek Zayin, chapter 7, the book of Vayikra. It says there, in the context of offering korbanot, pasuk kavav, v'chol dam lo tochelu, v'chol moshevotechem na'of lebehema, that a person cannot consume blood, even though there are tahor, kosher animals, livestock, birds, but in all of them, the blood may not be consumed. The next pasuk says the punishment. Kol nefesh asher tochal kol dam v'nichreta nefesh me'ameha. It's very serious. Karet. Karet is, besides capital punishment and bad din, the most severe punishment one can receive, and that's the punishment for consuming blood. So we're introduced without too much elaboration in Parashat Sav. However, if we turn in the book of Vayikra to Parashat Acharei Mot, we will see some serious elaboration on this mitzvah. There, again, in the context of certain prohibitions regarding korbanot, or having dedicated meat outside the proper confines in the Beit HaMikdash, the Torah once again mentions this prohibition. It's Perek Yud Zayin, chapter 17, pasuk Yud. V'ish ish beit Yisrael, umin hager hagar betocham, asher yochal kol dam. Anyone from the nation who consumes blood, listen to this approach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'natati panai b'nefesh ha'ochelet hadam. Literally, it means that I will pay attention, close attention to this person. Targum Unkilu says, Ve'eten rugzi, I will unleash my anger. I will spare nothing in terms of the rage that I will react with when this person consumes blood. Wipe it out, wipe this person out. Karet, again, wow, that term really is only used regarding the avodat hamolech, that abominable paganistic practice called the molech. God says, "Natati fanai," I'll pay mine in such a furious manner to this person. Continuing, the pasuk says, "Ki nefesh kol basar badami." That reason that rings a bell from our parasha. Fast forwarding to the book of Devarim, Parashat Re'eh, that we're in this week. The reason given, because nefesh kol basar hadamhu, badamhu, because the life of man is in the blood. I allowed it for the altar, for kapara, for atonement, not for any other reason. And finally, the pasuk says, don't you dare consume blood. All right, we have the sources. Let's talk about some of the possible reasons and the theories behind this prohibition. So the Rambam, the Moreh Nebuchim, offers a reason that he offers regarding a number of other mitzvot. And that is, it's a historical reason having to do with the way people, society and cultures in the past approached blood. And he speaks about the fact that blood was used in certain acts of sorcery, in certain interactions with shedim. It was used in a very abominable and paganistic practice, and also to mislead people. And therefore, the ingredient of blood is something almost similar to the way we approach Avodah Zarah, according to the Rambam, and not allowing Am Yisrael, or distancing Am Yisrael from practicing it all. So instead, what we do is we channel we embrace blood in a way that we channel it only to God in a prescribed, approved manner, just like the way the Rabbi approaches Korbanot. And he says, therefore, it's restricted for you because of the way it was used by certain cultures and practices amongst Gentile nations. And I will focus you towards me and channel it for the good while you're able to offer it to me in the most holy environment in the Beit HaMikdash for offering sacrifices. That's the Rambam's reason given. Reason number one. We'll give three main theories with a possible smattering of a couple of others. Rashi does what the Ramban offers to do, is just to look at the reason given offering the Torah. Twice now, Parashat Re'eh, previously in Parashat Haremot. And that is, Ki Nefesh Habasar Badami. The life is in blood. And says Rashi very simply, based on that, it's the ingredient of life, so to speak. The heart pumps blood through the body, and that's the way we function in life. We, and also other beings as well, in the animal kingdom, amphibians and fish, etc., all rely on blood. It's life, and God designated it only for the altar. Giving life, as Ibn Ezra helps him out and says, almost midah keneged midah, we are giving our souls, instead of giving ourselves because of our sin, we want atonement for our sin, we give another soul. We give life. We take the blood, which is the fuel of life of another being, we offer it on the altar. It's designated, says Rashi, only for that. Hands off. It represents life, it fuels life, and it atones for life. How? By offering it on the Mizbeach. You have no other permission beyond that impactful act, great magnitude of giving yourself atonement for sin, wiping out your avonot through this act. Only for that purpose am I designating the blood and nothing else, says Rashi, helped by Ibn Ezra within the same idea. And finally, theory number three, and that is the Ramban. The Ramban speaks historically about the fact that man was never meant to consume another being. If you go back to Adam Harishon, go through the narratives in Parashat Bereshit, we know that he was given the right to partake in the land, to be able to grow from the land, to be productive, and from what the land yields, the produce of the ground and the trees, man can consume and satiate and sustain himself. That's the way it was meant to be. Only post-Mabul, and we didn't even see really the right necessarily to kill animals, although it was alluded to in the original Berachat man. Only post-Mabul, when Noah exited from the Tebah, from the ark, do we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanding him to offer sacrifices, to slaughter animals, and in order to give offerings to God. At that point, says the Ramban, eating itself was not yet allowed until HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to make it easy and facilitate man's ability to live, not just from the produce of the ground, but also by partaking in other beings. And when God allowed that, God limited it to the flesh. And the reason is because, once again, living beings were never meant in the ideal, let's say, ethics of creation. Living beings were not meant to consume other living beings. Over and out, as they say nowadays, full stop, right? However, you got to do what you got to do, says Hashem. Hashem facilitated man's existence, and he allowed, therefore, man to consume with limitations. Your limitations are consume the flesh. The blood, the flesh, by the way, you can consume. You can also offer it on my altar in the future. Noah did it, but the future of the Jewish people, the chosen nation, as atonement, all that are the benefits of the flesh. But the blood, that's where I draw the line. Because, once again, consuming another living being, and he takes pains to go through the similarities between human beings, the Homo sapien, and other living beings that God created. The many, not just physical, but even some of them, so to speak, not really mental, but you can say based on way of life and instinct, the similarities between man and behemah and haya. And therefore, it's very inappropriate, not meant to be, off the table. Do not consume life, and blood represents the life. He says, when you do consume another being, that being actually becomes part of you, right? You eat flesh, and it becomes part of your flesh. Now, allowable in the Torah means that you follow my prescription, no harm will come from you, if you keep to the rules of kashrut in the Torah. But once you consume the fuel of life, which is blood, you are really inculcating that in your being. You're embedding that in your physical structure, and you may even be taking on some of the animalistic nature of the being that you are consuming. And maybe that will be a source for you to even embody some of the traits of that being that you consumed. And because of that, as an extension of this idea, the Sefer HaChinuch says maybe a trait of achzariyut, of cruelty, can come from such consumption of blood, of not having the mercy, of not consuming the entire, of refraining from consuming the entire being, even the life you consume that's an act of cruelty. And eventually when it sort of sinks into the bones, so you have the arrogance and the animalistic tendencies of the animal also inside of you. A very deep conceptual idea presented to us by the Ramban. Happens to be that Abarbanel mentions that it's also attached somewhat to the prohibition of Eved min hachai, the prohibition of having a limb come from a living being. Only through slaughter might we're allowed. Actually, in Parashat Bereshit, Noah was warned of that as well. And here it's alluded to in our parasha. He says it's attached also to the prohibition of blood. All right. So we have different angles. All these reasons coexist for the prohibition of blood, from distancing and refraining from paganistic societies, to respecting the designation of the function of blood only used for atonement, an eye for an eye for sacrifices, and the Ramban's deep conceptual idea of not consuming the life of another being and the damage that could come from it when that becomes part of your being. All right. Now, at least, we have somewhat of an idea of why the severity, first of all, the punishment of karet, and the severity in the approach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to he who consumes blood. Now, we know that in general, the laws of kashrut are what we call hukim, no reason given by the Torah. But here, explicitly, there are reasons given. And not only that, God says, as we read from our parasha, my fury will be unleashed. And if you really attach the reasons to this mizvah, you can understand why. You're engaged in paganistic practices. You're passing God's line in terms of his holy, sanctified designation of blood only for sacrifices, and you are doing a no-no from Adam Harishon and directed to mankind and fully consuming the life of another being. And God says, that's really bad. I'm really upset at you. And somehow, what seemed to be almost like an exaggeration of the Torah now makes a lot of sense. But we really haven't resolved yet is the benefit. Says the Torah, we'll reflect back on that pasuk that we read in our parasha, in the air, that don't drink it, don't consume it, don't consume it. And if you really abide by all that, lema'an yitav lecha, ubanecha harecha, benefits for you and your descendants, as you do, it's good in the eyes of God. Now, I got the strict reason for the prohibition, but it doesn't say that about a person who doesn't murder. It doesn't, the Torah doesn't recite those benefits for a person who doesn't steal, or even for a person who abides by the laws of kashrut. Why here regarding the blood? So the easier practical approach is taken by Ibn Ezra. You said that, it actually, as Ramban said, has a physical negative impact. It's detrimental to your physical being. Therefore, if you consume it, those that physically emanate from you, your offspring, will be negatively impacted. And if you don't, you're offering benefit to your descendants because they are staying clear of any wrongful physical connection, i.e. the blood of another being. And therefore, you have a physical benefit you're offering your descendants. Very practical reason given. Rashi, quoting the Gemara, basically takes this to a new level altogether and uses this mitzvah actually as the example. What does that mean? As Rashi says, quoting the Gemara, in Masechet Makot, learn from this. Sacharan shel mizvot, the idea of reward of the mizvot. If blood that someone desires and it's really repugnant to us, it's an abominable type of consumption, we really have no natural desire to consume it, God says, reward to your descendants, benefit to you, so much more so the types of avirot that we do desire, like the opposite sex, like thievery, etc. If you refrain from those things, how much more kal v'chomed, how much more so will God give you reward? This becomes all of a sudden the blood, the paradigm for reward of mizvot, an amazing thing. In other words, it's really astounding that the Torah should award you benefit, something that's so easy to keep. I understand why the prohibition is so severe, but guess what, God? I don't really want to drink blood. And the Torah says, exactly. And even so, I'll give you a great reward, all the more so the acts that you desire to engage in, that I stated them as prohibitions. If you obey me and refrain, how much more so for that self-control and that dedication and subservience to me will I offer you reward. Here's the paradigm for sechar mizvot. We have a little insight to the reward offered to us by keeping Hashem's mizvot. However, that really doesn't seem to explain the continuation. As you do, why does it have to mention it? You can say this. Torah can give this added segment of the pasuk, the statement on any mitzvah, as you do what is forthright in the eyes of God. And it's 4 quotes, a midrash and Vayikra Rabbah that opens up, extending from Rashi's quote from the Gemara, an absolutely new and profound idea regarding mizvot in general. And he says as follows. He says, you know what? You're going to refrain from drinking blood. You know why? He asked a kid. Earned. That's why. Who wants blood? Disgusting. Says the Torah, absolutely not. You might not want to drink it, but your drive, your motivation, your impetus for not consuming blood should not be because you're disgusted by it. It should be ki ta'aseh hayashad b'anei Adonai. I'm so happy not to have the blood, regardless of whether I really feel like having it or not, simply because God said. Says the Midrash, you should say, Yomar, I could consume it if I want. In other words, I can bring myself to do so. But my Father in heaven decreed upon me. In other words, the impetus for no matter how logical the mitzvah is, no matter how much the reason makes sense, the depth, the beauty behind this, we just put forth and we just scratched the surface in this class of a mitzvah. We still only perform it or refrain from not doing it because we subject ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that opens up a whole new world of behavior and motives for our behaviors. That this blood is the paradigm when it's so easy to do it for that reason. As Rashi said, it's so easy to refrain and still a great reward. And it's so easy to do because I want to do what's good in the active eyes of God. Because you know what? Okay, it's disgusting, and that's what seems to be the practical reason behind it. But the truth is, I don't have a desire, and still I'm doing it because I love God. That really is the way we have to approach the refraining from other averot in the Torah. I do desire the opposite sex. I desire to see, to feel. I desire to consume certain tasty type of foods. I desire to speak. I desire to take, to illegally. I'm a human being. I have natural desires. And you know what? That's okay that you have natural desires. You refrain from those natural desires for one reason and one reason only. You're an Eved Hashem. You're a servant of God. You're fully committed to your Creator in heaven. That is why you're refraining. And that is the impetus for us refraining from any Averah. That is the beauty behind being able to be an observant Jew in this world. That we take what is the opposite of our desire and we were able to overcome it. We're able to control it simply because of our commitment to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki ta'asheh hayashar b'anei Adonai. As hard as it is, a person doesn't have to feel bad because his physical desires. We are physical beings. Rather, he has to overcome them because he loves God even more than he loves that item that he wants to engage in. And that is the way we're loyal servant to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The paradigm for all that, the paradigm, the model for reward of mitzvot, and for the impetus for why we don't do averot is all in the blood. And thus, refraining from the blood, as we opened up, says the Torah, actually brings life. Amen, amen. Shabbat shalom.